Zami, A New Spelling of My Name is a 1982 biomythography by American poet Audre Lorde. It started a new genre that the author calls biomythography, which combines history, biography, and myth. 1. In the text, Lorde writes that Zami is a Carriacou name for women who work together as friends and lovers, noting that Carriacou is the Caribbean island from which her mother immigrated. 2. The name proves fitting. Lorde begins Zami writing that she owes her power and strength to the women in her life, and much of the book is devoted to detailed portraits of other women. Audre Lorde, born Audre Geraldine Lorde, February 18, 1934 to November 17, 1992, was an American writer, professor, philosopher, intersectional feminist, poet and civil rights activist. She was a self-described, Black, lesbian, feminist, socialist, mother, warrior, poet, who dedicated her life and talents to confronting all forms of injustice, as she believed there could be no hierarchy of oppressions. As a poet, she is well known for technical mastery and emotional expression, as well as her poems that express anger and outrage at civil and social injustices she observed throughout her life. As a spoken word artist, her delivery has been called powerful, melodic, and intense by the Poetry Foundation. 3. Her poems and prose largely deal with issues related to civil rights, feminism, lesbianism, illness, disability, and the exploration of Black female identity. Myth is a genre of folklore or theology consisting primarily of narratives that play a fundamental role in a society, such as foundational tales or origin myths. For folklorists, historians, philosophers or theologians, this is very different from the use of myth, which simply meaning something that is not true. Instead, the truth value of a myth is not a defining criterion. 1. Myths are often endorsed by secular and religious authorities and are closely linked to religion or spirituality. 2. Many societies group their myths, legends, and history together, considering myths and legends to be true accounts of their remote past. 2, 3, 4, 5. In particular, creation myths take place in a primordial age when the world had not achieved its later form. 2, 6, 7, 8. Other myths explain how a society's customs, institutions, and taboos were established and sanctified. 2, 7. There is a complex relationship between recital of myths and the enactment of rituals. Plot summary. Edit. Audre Lorde grows up in Harlem in the 1930s and 1940s, a child of Black West Indian parents. Lorde is legally blind from a very young age, isolating her even further from her surroundings in a family from which she does not receive much warmth or affection. Her two older sisters, Phyllis and Helen, are very close, but are rarely mentioned in Zami, and Lorde spends little time with them. Her parents and other adults, especially her mother, discipline her harshly for insolence. Lorde does not speak until age 4, when she declares that she wants to read, and promptly follows through on this desire. She witnesses racism from a young age. The family's landlord hangs himself for having to rent his flat to Black people. When the family takes a trip to Washington, D.C., they are not allowed to eat ice cream at a lunch counter because of Jim Crow laws. Despite the rampant racism of this era that Lorde encountered in her daily life, her mother attempted to shield her from it. When white people spit at them during Lorde's childhood, her mother would disparage those low-class people for spitting into the wind. After getting her first period at age 15, Lorde makes friends with a small number of non-Black girls at Hunter College High School, who label themselves the Branded. She is elected literary editor of the school's arts magazine and begins writing poetry. After graduation, she leaves home and shares a flat with friends of Jean's, one of the Branded, ceasing contact with her parents and two sisters. At the same time, she also goes out with Peter, a white boy who jilts her on New Year's Eve after finding out she is pregnant. Lorde ultimately decides to get an abortion. After some unhappy times at Hunter College, she moves to Stamford, Connecticut, to find work in a factory, where the working conditions prove atrocious. Following her father's death, she returns to New York and starts a relationship with B, whose heart she ends up breaking when she decides to move to Mexico to get away from McCarthyism. There, she goes to university and works as a secretary in a hospital. In Cuernavaca, she meets a lot of independent women, mostly lesbians. She has a relationship with one of them, Eudora, and works in a library. Back in New York, Lorde explores the lesbian bar scene, moves in with lover, Muriel. Another woman, Lynn, moves in with them and ends up leaving without warning and steals their savings. Finally, Lorde begins a relationship with a mother named Afrekat, who decides to leave to tend to her child. The book ends on a homage to Lorde's mother. Characters. Edit. Audre Lorde, the author. Linda Lorde, Audre's mother. She knows patois. She prepares lunch for the dad. Each child is asked once or twice a year which dish they would like her to prepare for dinner. The dad keeps his distance, unless the mom is in any way disrespected or talked back to, and then he will jump in. She is always longing for home, the island community she emigrated from. She is able to obtain work as a cleaner, but only because she is light enough to pass as Spanish. When the employer finds out she is black, she is fired. She outlives her husband. She refuses the free milk given to poor families. Phyllis and Helen, Audre's older sisters. The Branded, Audre's friends at high school. Maxine, Audre's Jewish friend at high school. Jenny, aka Genevieve, Audre's closest friend in high school who takes dance classes and commits suicide. The first person she consciously, truly loves. Louisa, Jenny's mother. Philip Thompson, Jenny's father who left home early and comes back when she is 15. Ella, Jenny's stepmother. Peter, a white boy whom Audre dates in New York. Ginger, Audre's colleague from the factory at Stamford, Audre's first female lover. Audre later moved in with Ginger and her mom, and paid rent for room and board. B, Audre's lover, met in New York. Only dated each other because of the mutual fact they were gay. They were supposed to go to Mexico together, but Audre stood her up when she realized it would be a bad idea to go together. With B, Audre did all the work, and B wasn't that responsive. They commuted back and forth from Philadelphia to see each other. Eudora, an older woman and Audre's lover in Mexico. She was a journalist and alcoholic. She was passionate about Mexican culture and history. She had a clothing shop with her ex in the Mexican town where they lived. She had lost a breast due to cancer. Muriel, Audre's lover. Her first long-term committed relationship. Muriel moves in with Audre. Muriel has been diagnosed with schizophrenia and has undergone electroshock therapy. Audre supports Muriel financially. Ginger introduced Muriel to Audre, as Muriel held the same job at the Stamford factory before Audre did. Rhea, Audre's roommate in New York after returning from Mexico. A straight white woman whose political work was jeopardized by living with a black lesbian, she leaves for Chicago in order to keep her job under the pretense of starting a new life after the demise of a relationship, but Audre does not know this at the time. Audre also lived with Rhea before going to Mexico. Rhea never has satisfying romantic relationships and wonders longingly at the love Muriel and Audre are experiencing at the beginning of their relationship. Felicia, aka Flea, a black lesbian who has a close but platonic relationship with Audre. Lynn, a lesbian who lives with Muriel and Audre for a while and is their mutual lover during this time. Tony, Audre's old acquaintance from high school, who turns out a lesbian. Jerry, a black lesbian from Queens. Jerry and her partner are known for their wonderful parties, which have abundant food, in contrast to the Upper West Side parties which do not have much food and are much more uptight. Kitty, aka Afrekat, the last lover mentioned in the book, met through Jerry. She has a daughter and leaves abruptly back to Atlanta to visit her mom and daughter. Lorde never sees her again, but mentions Kitty will always be part of her. Major themes. Lesbianism. The book describes the way lesbians lived in New York City, Connecticut and Mexico during the 1950s through 1970s. Racism. The landlord who hangs himself, the ice cream episode in Washington, D.C., and the increased suspicion during the McCarthy era all contribute to highlight the theme of racism. The mother Lorde's difficult relationship with her mother, whom she credits for imbuing her with a certain sense of strength, pervades throughout the book. McCarthyism and the Rosenbergs are also mentioned. Zami, a new spelling of my name summary. Audre Lorde grew up in Harlem and Washington Heights in the 1930s and 1940s. The child of black West Indian parents, she had a difficult start in life. Legally blind from infancy, she was isolated from her surroundings and from family members who did not know how to connect with her and never really tried to extend themselves to find out. They were rather cold towards her, rarely loving and demonstrative. Lorde had two older sisters, who were very close to each other, but with whom she spent little time. Lorde was very strictly disciplined both at home and in the Catholic schools she attended. Lorde did not begin speaking until she was 4 years old, when she announced that she wanted to learn to read. From the beginning of the book we see the shadow of racism over Lorde's world. The family's landlord was so ashamed that he rented his property to a black family that he committed suicide. A family trip to Washington was curtailed when they discovered that due to the Jim Crow laws they were not permitted to eat ice cream at a lunch counter. Yet despite this blatant and ever-present racism, Lorde witnessed very little of it because her mother was determined to hide it from her daughters, whom she wanted to grow up feeling that they had the power to do anything they chose. Lorde made friends as she got older and was even elected school magazine editor at her high school. This was also the first time she wrote poetry and began her career as a writer, though she did not yet see it as such. She experienced an early trauma when her best friend Jenny committed suicide, and vowed to never love anyone again because it was too difficult to lose them. Lorde left home shortly after graduation and lost touch with her family almost immediately, immersing herself in her new grown-up world. She started dating a white boy named Peter, who eventually lost interest in her. He also got her pregnant, though she did not tell him. She had an abortion and, deciding she was ready to leave New York for a while, moved to Connecticut where she worked in a sweatshop masquerading as a legitimate factory. As a young black woman, she was powerless to complain about working conditions and was considered lucky to have a job at all. She struck up a friendship with a woman named Ginger, and the two became lovers. Lorde did not return to New York City until she heard that her father had passed away. She soon decided to move to Mexico, a place that was full of allure, especially to someone who was outside society's margins during the repressive 1950s. Mexico, she experienced a great deal of happiness and freedom. She attended university classes, explored Mexico City, and became acquainted with a community of lesbians who were strong, independent, and represented exactly the kind of woman that Lorde wanted to be. She spent most of her time with Audre, an older woman for whom she had strong feelings. Audre was unstable, but taught Lorde profound lessons in life and love. When Lorde returned to New York, she roomed with a white progressive woman named Rhea. She took on a variety of jobs, but her race made it difficult to find something that inspired her or paid her fairly. She made friends and was part of the Greenwich Village lesbian scene, though she still felt like an outsider of sorts. She was in college throughout these years, knowing she had to get a degree or she would not have much of a future. Lorde started a serious relationship with Muriel, a young Italian woman with a history of mental instability. The two of them were madly in love and moved in together, but eventually Muriel cheated on Lorde and mentally broke down. Lorde was devastated and found it difficult to extricate herself from the relationship, but finally the two of them separated. She did not think she would be able to be with anyone ever again, and was profoundly depressed. The last woman Lorde writes of was a woman called Audre. The two had a passionate connection and Lorde began to heal from her despair over Muriel. Though Audre eventually moved away, Lorde was now strong enough to reflect on her relationship with her mother, and to take on the name, Zami, which was a West Indian name, Carico in particular, which was her mother's region for women who worked together and were lovers. Zami, a new spelling of my name character list. Audre Lorde. Lorde was a black woman, a poet, a lesbian, and a mother. As she depicts herself in Zami, she was a strong woman and credited the women who were around her for this strength. Lorde marched to the beat of her own drum, partly because it was just her nature and partly because she was isolated growing up. She was a woman who was constantly searching for something, for meaning, for home, for independence, for love, for truth. As she grew up, she embraced her sexuality and what it meant to be a woman who loved other women. She also came to terms with racism, something her mother tried to shield her from. She saw herself in all her identities, creator, lesbian, black, without needing to separate them or have them war with each other. Linda Lorde. Linda was Lorde's mother. A West Indian immigrant, she longed for her home and tried to preserve its traditions, especially with song and food, here in America. She had an imposing presence that caused others to be deferential to her, but Lorde intuits later that she was actually quite powerless in many respects. Strict and authoritative with her daughters, Linda often came across as unloving. She tried to shield her children from racism by pretending it didn't exist, which often led to tense situations. She worked hard and had a mutually supportive relationship with Lorde's father, and thus felt unmoored when he died. She did not acknowledge Lorde's lesbianism, though Lorde never came out to her. Byron Lorde. Byron, Lorde's father, was distant and rarely connected with his children. While not cruel, he believed in discipline and order. He would involve himself in family matters only if he saw the girls disrespecting his wife or talking back. Phyllis and Helen Lorde. Phyllis and Helen were Lorde's older sisters. They were very close to each other but made no effort to include their younger sister in anything that they did, and consequently Lorde did not know them well. From them, though, Lorde learned that one could tell stories, which forever changed her creative outlook. Genevieve. Genevieve was commonly known as Jenny, and was Lorde's closest friend in high school. She was one of a kind, loud and assertive, intelligent, and prone to get into trouble. She trained in classical ballet and loved to dress up and act extravagantly. Her main source of pain was her family situation. She'd initially never known her father, and when he came back into her life, she decided she wanted to live with him. When her mother refused, she attempted suicide. Though she seemed to improve and was able to live with her father after she recovered, he began sexually abusing her. Feeling like she had nowhere to turn, she again attempted suicide and was successful. Maxine. Maxine was one of the first white girls with whom Audre became friendly, and was also a little bit of an outcast herself because she was Jewish. She was very shy and played the piano. The Branded. Lorde's group of high school girlfriends, the Branded, were a sisterhood of rebels, 81 who talked about poetry, sex, and politics. They did not talk about whiteness and blackness, but Lorde herself did not have the language yet to do so. They cherished their strangeness, were proud of their outrageousness and their madness, learned how to mock the straight set, and learned that not feeling at all was worse than hurting. 82. The Branded included Lori, Judy, Martha, and others. Ginger. Ginger was one of Lorde's closest friends in Stamford as well as her first female lover. She was black, 25, divorced, extremely loquacious, and ebullient. She believed Lorde was a sophisticated lesbian from the city and teased her about it often, but she was sexually interested in Lorde and made the first moves. Lorde was mesmerized by her body, which she described as like the Venus of Willendorf, gorgeously fat, with an open knowledge about her body's movement that was delicate and precise. 136. B. A friend of Lorde's friend Jill, whom she runs into the day the Rosenbergs were executed. The two were very different, with B's family, old, mainline, white, and moneyed. 151. They also had little sexual chemistry, though they became lovers. B was rosy-cheeked, with a rosebud mouth whose corners always pointed down. 151, and blonde hair and blue eyes. She was very depressed and determined to keep Lorde after Lorde broke up with her, and spent 2 days out in front of her apartment, waiting for her to come back. Eudora. Lorde's friend and lover in Mexico. Eudora was an American living in Mexico, in love with Mexican culture and history, and someone who seemed always to have lived her life as if it were a story, a little grander than ordinary. 169. She was a lesbian, formerly involved with Karen, another American in Mexico, and the most fascinating woman I had ever met. 162 according to Lorde. She was 48, gray-haired, a journalist, brilliant, and an alcoholic. She also had breast cancer and lost a breast. Lorde felt there was a reserve about her own person, a force field around her that I did not know how to pass, a sadness surrounding her that I could not breach. 164-65. Over the course of Lorde's time in Mexico, Eudora became more encumbered by her alcoholism and her anger, but her role in Lorde's life remained positive and meaningful. Muriel. Muriel was a former co-worker of Ginger's who invited Lorde out. She was 23, Italian, had large eyes and a pale face and dark hair, and had been treated for schizophrenia before she met Lorde. Lorde remarked on her great sweetness hidden, and a vulnerability which surpassed even my own, with a sense of humor that was sudden and appealing. 186. She and Lorde were both dreamy poets, and both had friends who died young. Muriel had trouble getting her life together, and even though she and Lorde were happy for a time, she began mentally languishing. She could not get a job and began cheating on Lorde, and after they broke up seemed to have another mental breakdown. Rhea. When Lorde returned to New York from Mexico, she becomes roommates with Rhea. Rhea was a straight white woman involved in progressive, Marxist politics who put her role in that cadre at considerable risk by sharing a home with a black lesbian. Because she wanted to keep her job, she relocated to Chicago, but did not tell Lorde the real reason. Rhea was a little jealous of Lorde's relationship with Muriel because her own relationships were such disasters that she was a little wistful when she witnessed a happy one. Lynn. B's former girlfriend who came to live with Muriel and Lorde for a time. She was broad, squat, and very sexy, and in terrible emotional shape. 211 after her husband was killed in car crash that almost took her life as well. She had nightmares often and was looking for a safe place. She and Lorde and Muriel were all lovers for a time and hoped to practice the kind of sisterhood that we talked and dreamed about for the future. 211 But Lynn eventually tired of being the third wheel and left one day, taking the other girl's money. Tony. A friend of Lorde's from high school whom she ran into in the village. Tony was a successful nurse and was also a lesbian. She was fun and warm, big and brusque. She became close friends with Muriel and Lorde. Afrekat, Kitty. A black lesbian Lorde met at a party, and then again in the village, with whom she had a mutually satisfying and meaningful love affair. Kitty had a broad and smooth, 243 face, smelled of soap and Jean Nate, 243 dressed well, and her chocolate skin, sculptured mouth reminded me of a Benin bronze, 244. She was loving, bold, and sensual, and taught Lorde much about love. She was infused with Africa and the Caribbean, and taught me roots, 250, Lorde wrote. Ma Liz. Linda Lorde's mother who lived in Carico. In the stories Lorde heard of her, she admired the women's community that Ma Liz was a part of. Mrs. Augusta Baker. The kindly librarian who stoked Lorde's interest in reading. Sister Mary of Perpetual Help. A cold and cruel nun who tyrannized over Lorde while she was in Catholic school. Lorde surmised she must have hated children. Louisa. Jenny's, young, and pretty, and very reasonable, 90 mother, who seemed very modern, 90. She had a very close relationship with Jenny and was opposed to her getting involved with her father. Philip Thompson. Jenny's father, who had a charming wit, and was a quick and bitter man of much wit and little love, who preyed upon whatever admiration he could find, 91. He began sexually abusing Jenny. It was also implied that he was abusive to his girlfriend, Ella. Ella. Philip's girlfriend. Lorde and Jenny thought she might be a little crazy, as she always sang a tuneless, violent little song as she swept, but as she grew older and wiser, Lorde revised her opinion, and now I think the goddess was speaking through Ella also, but Ella was too beaten down and anesthetized by Philip's brutality to believe in her own mouth, 251. Peter. A white boy whom Lorde started dating after meeting him at a Labor Youth League party. She does not devote any space to describing his personality. Peter soon lost interest in Lorde but occasionally reached out to her again. Their last encounter resulted in her getting pregnant, though she did not tell him. Ms. Lewis. The black ladies' room attendant at Hunter High School. She was there for Lorde when she was feeling sick after her abortion, though she did not know what was wrong with Lorde. She was kindly, warm, and generous, with a broad short-waisted bosom, 114. Marie. A girl on the fringes of the branded, who was short and round, with immense Mediterranean eyes shining out of a heart-shaped face, 120. She loved poetry like Lorde did. She did not want to go to college, so she got a job after high school, and impetuously married a young man named Jim the same night she met him. Their relationship soured and she went to Detroit to live under the radar. Jean. A friend of Jenny's who was a dancer, was dark and beautiful, 89, and went to the High School of Music and Art. Lorde still spent time with her in the city after they graduated high school and Jenny died. Cora. Jenny's young, brash, and hard-working mother who took care of Ginger and her 4 brothers. Frida Matthews. A friend of Ray's who lived in Mexico with her daughter Tammy after her divorce. She was a calm, intelligent, and forthright woman in her early 40s, 157. She was very helpful and welcoming to Lorde, and introduced her to the community of American women expatriates living in Mexico City. Felicia. A black lesbian whom Lorde befriended when she moved to the village after Mexico. Felicia had the face of a spoiled nun, skinny and sharp brown, 177, and she and Lorde became extremely close and decided they were sisters instead of just friends. Lorde actually knew her in Catholic school as a tough little kid, and a skinny little kid who made my life hell, 178. Lorde and Felicia bonded over their blackness and how it made them isolated in the village lesbian scene. Saul and Jimmy. The 2 owners of a diner Lorde frequented while living in New York. Saul was Jewish and Jimmy was Puerto Rican. Lorde and the men shot a lot of bull over that counter, and exchanged a lot of ideas and daily news, 183. And came to be friends. Lorde found it interesting, though, that they did not seem to know he was black. Mrs. Goodrich. The head of the accounting department at the hospital. She was an overbearing and awe-inspiring woman, a Tartar, who had won by the same terms as the men whom she had fought, 188. She was cruel and cold towards Lorde, constantly insulting her and making her time at the job miserable. Nikki and Joan. 2 white lesbians whom Lorde and Muriel befriended. Nikki was a writer and Joan a secretary. They looked very proper and elegant in their straight clothes, and for that reason, and because they lived so far uptown, it felt like they lived far more conventional life than we did. 217. Muriel and Joan eventually had an affair. Jill, a friend of Lorde's from high school with whom she had unfinished business. They were both poets, renegades, and very determined young women. 228, and thus had a lot in common, but they were wary of each other. 228 as well. When Muriel and Jill slept together, it signaled the beginning of the end for Muriel and Lorde. Dottie and Polly. 2 skinny blonde artists, from the neighborhood whom Lorde and Muriel befriended. Zami, a new spelling of my name is a biomythography concerning the coming of age of poet Audre Lorde 1934–1992. This work of creative nonfiction conflates the author's memoir, which spans from the time of her birth to her early 20s, with West Indian mythology and stories, as well as the author's own poetry. In this way, the work exists as something other than a simple autobiography, as it emphasizes the importance of dreams, stories, and songs within the authorial development of identity. Born to West Indian immigrants, Lorde grows up as a black child in New York City in the 1930s and 1940s. The book follows the exploration of her identity as a lesbian in the 1950s. Being a black lesbian, the author never feels like she belongs, both as a black woman in an overtly racist and misogynist America and living as a lesbian in an era prior to the word lesbian being regularly used. Even though Lorde knows, from childhood, her predilection for women, she has no language with which to express her identity. In this way, the title, Zami, the Karakou name for women who work side by side as friends and lovers, substantiates Lorde's identity in language, as language itself represents an integral aspect of the author's identity. As a child, Lorde did not speak until she could read. Throughout her life, reading and writing became an increasingly important mode of self-expression. Indeed, even as a young adult, Lorde finds communication difficult. She feels as though she can never truly express her thoughts and feelings, as though the expectations of other people always hold her back. In this way, creating a new spelling of her name is integral to her self-expression and her coming of age, cementing a position for herself within an openly hostile society. Crucial to this building's Roman is the idea of home, namely, the idea that home is a place that is intangible to the author. The child of immigrants, Lorde believes that her home is not in New York City, but rather in the country of her parents' birth. In this way, the idea of home becomes mythologized, existing as a place that Lorde cannot reach. This intangibility of home reflects upon Lorde's own identity. A home is a place where one belongs, and Lorde has never felt like she has belonged, even within her parents' house. As such, Lorde conflates her quest for identity with her desire to find a home, merging disparate realities in order to create a place in which she feels as though she belongs. Lorde makes her home from a community of women from whom she finds strength and commonality, realizing that the stories of her childhood can be reinterpreted within the reality of her own life. The narrative arc of this biomythography follows Lorde's relationships with women. First, the audience witnesses the narrator's tumultuous relationship with her mother, with whom Lorde feels much closer than her father. Throughout her childhood, Lorde has few friends, and many of her interactions are based off of this maternal relationship. As an adolescent, Lorde befriends many other girls her own age, such as the Branded, a group of mostly white outcasts in her school who bond over their shared otherness, and Jenny, Lorde's best friend, who commits suicide before her 16th birthday. With these relationships, Lorde begins to understand her desire to be romantically involved with women, which leads her to her first sexual encounter with Ginger when Lorde is 18. Lorde's narrative then oscillates between the overwhelming loneliness of a lack of female companionship and the recounting of her various sexual, romantic relationships. These relationships include the older Eudora, who Lorde meets during her escape to Mexico, her live-in partner, Muriel, and, eventually, her relatively short but psychically intense fling with Afrekat. Throughout each of these relationships, Lorde learns things about herself and becomes more self-confident. In the background of this biomythography lies a variety of complicated historical contexts that alternately shift and remain the same over time. Growing up, Lorde must face the impoverished reality of the Great Depression as her parents try to eke out a living in a new land. Lorde's childhood is also mitigated by the rationing and fear resultant from World War II. Subsequently, Lorde's adolescence and early adulthood are doused in the paranoia of the Red Scare. Amidst the conformity of the 1950s, Lorde finds herself politically and sexually at odds with the rest of American society, although she eventually learns to embrace these differences. Throughout the narrative, the racism systemic within American society reinforces Lorde's feelings of otherness and impedes her ability to make a home for herself. Once she identifies as a lesbian, she struggles simply to survive within a society that is openly hostile to her. In this way, the book becomes a story of survival against all odds.